May 4th, 1945, Northern Tyrol, Austria. Rain drifted sideways across the mountains, carried by a cold wind rolling down from the Alps. For most German soldiers still alive in this final, collapsing week of the war, the sound of distant thunder meant Allied artillery. But for Major Josef Sepp Gangl, once a proud artillery officer of the Wehrmacht, thunder now meant something else entirely. It meant time was running out. Gangl stood in the doorway of a ruined farmhouse, overlooking the narrow valley that led toward the medieval stone towers of Castle Itter, a 13th century fortress perched on a rocky hilltop above the town of Virgil. A castle that, to his disbelief and shame, had become a prison. Not for criminals, not for soldiers, but for some of Europe's most prominent political prisoners held by the collapsing SS regime. Inside that fortress were men whose names had once shaken the cabinets of Europe. Édouard Daladier, former French Prime Minister; Paul Reynaud, his rival and successor; General Maurice Gamelin, commander of the French army in 1940; General Maxime Weygand; Jean Barotra, the famous tennis champion; and several others, locked away as bargaining chips by a regime that was now disintegrating in real time. But it wasn't their presence that haunted Gangl's thoughts. It was the fire he had seen in the distance the night before. SS units, retreating from the advancing Americans, were falling back unpredictably. Some roamed the countryside like cornered wolves, killing both civilians and surrendered Wehrmacht soldiers who refused to continue a hopeless fight. Gangl had already deserted the official German command structure. He had defected, not to the Allies, but to the local Austrian resistance, whose pleas he could no longer ignore. Now, they came to him with a request unlike anything he had ever imagined. "Major," one of the resistance men whispered, "the SS is preparing to storm the castle. The prisoners will be executed. They need help. But we cannot defend it alone." Gangl stared at him. He was asking a veteran Wehrmacht officer to fight against the SS, to protect political figures the regime had spent years demonizing, to cooperate, worse, coordinate, with the Americans advancing from Kufstein. It was treason. It was madness. It was the only honorable choice left. Gangl's voice was quiet but steady. "Take me to the Americans." 13 miles away, American lines, 103rd Infantry Division. The first American officer to lay eyes on Joseph Gangl thought the German had lost his mind. Captain John C. Jack Lee, commander of a Sherman tank force from the 23rd Tank Battalion, had seen German soldiers surrender by the hundreds since crossing the Inn River. But none came forward with a request like this. A Wehrmacht major, asking American tankers to join him in defending a medieval castle. Against the SS, Lee asked him to repeat it twice. Gangl, exhausted and mud-stained from his ride through enemy-held territory, explained the situation with a clarity that forced Lee to sit down. The SS planned to kill the prisoners. The Austrian resistance was outgunned. The castle was isolated, almost impossible to defend without armor. And the SS battalion moving toward it included seasoned fanatics from the 17th SS Panzer Grenadier Division. Lee removed his helmet, ran a hand through his hair, and muttered, "This is the craziest damn thing I've ever heard." Gangl replied quietly, "Captain, if we do nothing, they will all die." There was a moment of silence between them, a strange, tense, impossible moment, where two enemy officers weighed the morality of an operation that neither army manual had ever prepared them for. Then, Captain Jack Lee grinned. "Major, let's go save your castle." The unlikely alliance. By dusk, one of the strangest combat groups of the war began moving toward Castle Itter. 40. American soldiers from the 23rd Tank Battalion, one Sherman tank, named Besotten Jenny, 10 German Wehrmacht soldiers loyal to Gangl, a handful of Austrian resistance fighters, and, waiting at the castle, the French prisoners themselves, some of whom insisted on taking up arms. It would become the only recorded instance in history where American troops and Wehrmacht soldiers fought side by side against the SS. As the small column rolled toward the fortress, rain began to fall harder. The mountain roads grew slippery. Somewhere in the dark forests above, SS scouts were already watching. Gangle leaned against the hull of the Sherman, hands shaking slightly. Not from fear, but from the enormity of what was unfolding. American and German soldiers smoking together, sharing intelligence, discussing angles of fire, preparing to defend a medieval castle like knights of some twisted modern crusade. Gangle murmured, almost to himself, "If my father could see this, he would not believe it." Captain Lee heard him. "No one's going to believe any of this, Major. So let's make sure someone survives to tell it." Ahead, the towers of Castle Itter emerged through the mist like ghostly sentinels. Behind them, SS troops moved into position. The battle was coming. And for the first time in years, German soldiers would fight not for Berlin's dreams of conquest, but for honor. May 4th, 1945, evening. The rain turned to a cold mist as Castle Itter rose before the approaching column, its stone walls glowing faintly under the fading alpine light. The forest around it felt unnaturally still, as if nature itself were holding its breath. Captain Jack Lee's Sherman tank, Besotted Jenny, rumbled across the narrow bridge leading to the gatehouse, its tracks slipping slightly on the wet stones. The French prisoners heard the engine first, then the voices, then the impossible. A Sherman tank, with a white star on its hull, escorted by German Wehrmacht soldiers. General Maurice Gamelin, once commander of all French forces, leaned over the castle parapet with an expression mixed of disbelief and relief. Jean Baratra, the French tennis champion, laughed aloud. "I told you, gentlemen, this war has grown absurd. Americans and Germans fighting together? I'll believe anything now." Inside the courtyard, the French VIPs gathered around Captain Lee as he jumped down from the tank. None had seen freedom in years. Their faces showed exhaustion, uncertainty, and something that looked like hope forcing its way back into their bones. "You're the Americans?" Paul Renault asked, still skeptical. "Yes, sir," Lee replied. "And these," he gestured toward Gangle and his Wehrmacht volunteers, "are the good Germans." The phrase felt strange on his tongue, but it was true. Gangle stepped forward, removed his officer's cap, and bowed his head slightly. "Gentlemen, we are here to protect you from the SS." The prisoners exchanged glances. The world had turned upside down. Inside the castle, War Council in a medieval hall. The group gathered in the old Knights' Hall, lit by flickering torches and a single electric bulb, still working from a failing generator. Maps were unrolled, furniture dragged aside, rifles distributed. Each man, French, German, American, Austrian, stood around the table like characters in a story no historian could have invented. Lee spoke first. "We're badly outnumbered. The SS is moving a battalion up the mountain. They're angry, desperate, and they know what's inside these walls." He paused, feeling the weight of dozens of eyes. "To be blunt, gentlemen, they want you dead before the Americans officially liberate this region," Gangle continued in a low voice. "The SS sees you as bargaining chips already lost. Killing you would be a final act of defiance." A silence settled across the hall. Even the stone walls seemed to absorb the dread. General Wagan finally asked, "How many men defend this castle?" Lee counted calmly. 14 Americans, 10 German soldiers under Major Gangle, 6 Austrian resistance fighters. And, he glanced toward Baratra, anyone else willing to pick up a rifle. Baratra grinned. "I served France at Wimbledon. I suppose I can serve her here." Daladier raised an eyebrow. "This will be the strangest army ever assembled." Lee set his palms on the table. "We're going to make it stranger. I need firing positions on every tower. Any man who knows how to reload a rifle. Congratulations, you're infantry." Gamelin asked the final question. "And what if they bring artillery?" Lee shrugged. "Then we pray this castle is as old and stubborn as it looks." The castle prepares for battle night fell over Tyrol, cold and moonless. The defenders rushed through the castle like men trying to repair a sinking ship. Americans hauled ammunition boxes up narrow staircases. Wehrmacht gunners set up machine guns along the parapets. Austrians barricaded the main gate with overturned carts and stone slabs. The French prisoners, statesmen, generals, intellectuals, carried rifles with trembling hands. The French cook, André, insisted on preparing one last meal from dwindling supplies. Victory requires soup, he muttered. Gangel moved silently among his men. The Wehrmacht soldiers looked to him not as a superior, but as a moral compass in the chaos of the dying Reich. He spoke softly to each one, reminding them that this fight, unlike so many before, was just. Tonight, he told them, we fight for something clean. 0530, first contact. A single rifle crack echoed from the tree line. Every man in the castle froze. Another shot. Then, a burst of automatic fire. Then, the unmistakable sound of boots moving through the forest. The SS had arrived. Lee sprinted to the Sherman, which he had positioned just inside the gatehouse arch. "Get the headlights on," he shouted. "I want them to see exactly what's waiting for them." The tank's lamps blazed to life, cutting through the darkness like twin suns. Gangel climbed the north wall. Through the mist, he saw the shapes, dark uniforms, helmets, rifles at the ready. A probing attack, testing the defenders. Machine gun fire erupted from the forest. Bullets pinged against the castle stone, sending showers of dust into the air. French generals who had once commanded hundreds of thousands now crouched behind medieval battlements, holding rifles like schoolboys in a militia. Gamelin muttered, "I never imagined my last battle would be fought from a tower." Weygand replied, "At least this time, we have allies who show up." The first assault begins. The SS troops surged from the tree line, firing as they ran. American GIs answered with disciplined volleys. German Wehrmacht soldiers fired in short bursts, conserving ammunition. Smoke drifted across the moat like battlefield fog. Major Gangel shouted orders in German, orders that saved American and French lives. Lee bellowed commands in English. Borotra yelled curses in French. 3 languages. One desperate defense. Then, the forest erupted again, this time with something far more serious, a 20mm cannon. The rounds slammed into the castle walls, gouging out stone. The defenders ducked as fragments sliced through the air. Lee pointed toward the gun's flash. "Bring the Sherman around! Load he!" The tank lumbered forward, turret turning, engine roaring through the courtyard. Then came the explosion. The Sherman fired, its shot lighting the entire valley for a split second. The SS cannon went silent. But the attack was only beginning. Behind the tree line, shadows moved in waves. Hundreds of SS men preparing for the second assault. Inside the castle, the defenders reloaded and braced for impact. The strangest alliance of World War II was about to face its deadliest moment. May 5th, 1945, 07:10. The morning fog clung to the valley like a shroud. In it, the SS attackers became shifting phantoms, appearing, disappearing, reappearing again in the pale light. Rifle rounds cracked against the castle walls with the rhythm of rain on tin. Inside the courtyard, Captain Jack Lee climbed atop his Sherman-besotted Jenny, trying to spot where the main assault would break. The tank's hull still radiated heat from the cannon blast minutes earlier. Major Joseph Gangel joined him, binoculars in hand. "They're repositioning," Gangel said, "preparing a new push, bigger one." Lee nodded. "Then we'll hit them back harder." He jumped down and shouted to his men, "Everyone stay sharp. They're probing for weak spots. If they find one, we lose this place in 10 minutes." The French prisoners in the fight atop the battlements. The French VIPs, politicians, generals, even the tennis champion Borotra, fired sporadic shots from Springfield rifles. These were men accustomed to debates, ministries, diplomatic cables, not trenches, not castle walls, not machine gun duels with SS diehards. Yet, there they were. Paul Renault, former French PM, shielded behind a stone balcony, Reloading with trembling hands, Edouard Daladier muttered insults under his breath in French each time he fired. General Gamelin stood back, observing fields of fire with the detached calm of a man who had once commanded millions. And Jean Barotra, the bounding Basque, moved along the wall with athletic ease. He shouted toward Lee, "If you need a messenger, Captain, I still run faster than most men here." "Save it, Jean," Lee yelled. "No need for heroics." Barotra just winked. So 7:30. The second assault. Without warning, the forest exploded with rifle and machine gun fire. SS troops charged the open slope leading to the castle's main gate. Grenades arced through the air, detonating near the moat. The defenders answered with a wall of fire. The Sherman thundered. Its 75mm shell tore into a cluster of SS troops, sending bodies and earth into the air. But the attackers kept coming. Dozens, then scores, then what looked like a full company. Gangl shouted in German, "Feuer konzentrieren! Feuer auf das Mittelfeld! Concentrate fire! Hit the center line!" Lee echoed in English, "Keep them pinned! Don't let them reach the wall!" The defenders' rifles cracked non-stop. A Wehrmacht gunner with an MG-42 swept the hillside in deadly arcs. American bar gunners fired until their shoulders burned. Still, the SS surged forward. This wasn't a strategic assault. This was rage. A last week of the war vengeance strike from men who knew their world was ending. The wall breaches at Oit-10, the SS found their mark. A recoilless 20mm gun hidden behind rock outcroppings fired directly at the castle's north wall. Each impact sent vibrations through the stone. Cracks widened. Dust fell from the ceiling of the upper chambers. Lee saw it instantly. "They're trying to punch a hole! Gangl! North side is priority." Gangl nodded and sprinted through the courtyard, shouting orders. His own men followed without hesitation. These Wehrmacht soldiers were under no illusions. Their homeland was collapsing, their army defeated. Yet here they were, fighting beside Americans to protect French statesmen. In that moment, they were simply soldiers doing the right thing. Inside the castle, tension rising. Meanwhile, the French prisoners huddled inside the keep as stray bullets ricocheted through the windows. Daladier snapped, "Tell me again how we ended up in a medieval fortress defended by Americans and Germans against other Germans?" Renaud replied dryly, "History has a sense of humor." Barotra added, "At least it's not boring." A burst of machine gun fire shattered a window. Renaud ducked. Very funny. 08:45. Crisis at the main gate. Lee's greatest fear came true. The Sherman's ammunition was nearly gone. The tank's coaxial machine gun jammed, and the SS had brought up heavier weapons, a field gun dragged by hand through the forest. The first shell struck the castle gatehouse, blowing apart the roof tiles. The second shell hit Besat and Jenny directly. The Sherman lurched violently, smoke hissing from its engine compartment. Lee cursed and hit the side of the turret. "Damn it, engine's gone!" The tank was still usable as a bunker, but it could no longer move or turn effectively. The defenders were now pinned. The SS were gathering for another push, and ammunition was dwindling fast. Gangl climbed the tower steps 2 at a time until he reached the highest parapet, where he saw something terrifying. A mass of SS troops, maybe 100 strong, forming up behind the tree line for a decisive assault. He whispered to himself, "We cannot survive that." 09, sir. The turning point. Major Gangl made a decision that would enter the annals of history. He ran back into the castle, down the stone corridor, and found Lee near the damaged Sherman. "Captain!" Gangl shouted. "We need reinforcements. We won't last another hour." Lee's jaw tightened. "I know." Gangl pointed toward the valley road. "I will go. On foot. I know the terrain. I can slip through." Lee grabbed him. "No way. They'll cut you down." Gangl replied quietly, "My men swore to protect these prisoners. I am their officer. It must be me." Before Lee could argue further, a shout rang out from above. "Movement on the ridge!" Lee and Gangl rushed to the courtyard. A figure, fast, agile, unmistakable, was sprinting across the lower slope beyond the castle. Jean Barotra. He had vaulted the wall. He was running straight through areas swept by SS machine gun fire. Lee shouted after him, voice cracking with disbelief. Barotra, get back here. The French champion didn't break stride. He yelled over his shoulder, You need a runner to Virgil, Captain. Well, now you have one. Gangle watched him disappear into the trees. For a moment, war paused. Nobody in the castle spoke. Nobody could believe what they had just seen. Not an American, not a German, not a soldier. A French tennis star had sprinted through gunfire in a last-ditch hope to save everyone inside. Gangle exhaled slowly. If God exists, he runs like Barotra. The castle was now almost out of ammunition. The SS was preparing its final assault. And the defenders, this impossible alliance, were running out of time. Part 4 is where the battle reaches its climax. The breach, Gangle's sacrifice, Barotra's mission, and the arrival of American reinforcements. May 5th, 1945. 10. The air above Castle Itter vibrated with tension. Smoke drifted from the damaged gatehouse. The Sherman tank sat crippled in the courtyard, still glowing faintly from the shell that had struck it earlier. Captain Jack Lee scanned the forested slope with binoculars. Where the hell is Barotra? He muttered. The French champion had vanished 30 minutes earlier into the trees, running straight through open terrain swept by SS fire. If he failed to reach Virgil, if he fell on the mountainside, if he was captured, the castle would stand alone. Lee lowered the binoculars. Damn brave fool, he whispered. Behind him, Major Joseph Gangle was briefing his remaining men. Their ammunition was nearly gone. The MG-42 had overheated. The Austrians had run out of rifle rounds. Some French prisoners were down to their last bullet. They all felt it. The end was coming. 10:15. SS final assault begins. A sudden, almost unnatural silence fell over the forest. A silence soldiers recognize as the moment before an attack. Then it came. A thunderous scream of voices. The crackle of automatic fire. Grenades arcing through the mist. The SS stormed out of the tree line in a dark wave, pouring across the open slope with ruthless momentum. Their officers shouted commands, driving them forward like a living battering ram. From the parapets, American, German, and French defenders fired desperately. Gangle shouted in German, "Hold the lower wall! Hold it!" Lee yelled in English, "Don't let them reach the gate!" The French yelled whatever came to mind, but their fingers pulled triggers with the same determination. The SS reached the moat, then the outer wall, then began climbing. The castle was seconds from being overrun. Inside the castle, chaos. Inside the courtyard, the Sherman tank became the last line of defense. Lee climbed into the turret and manned the 50 caliber machine gun mounted on top. "Cover the walls!" he yelled to his crew. He squeezed the trigger. The 50 cal roared to life, spitting fire at the attackers climbing the stonework. SS soldiers fell backward, tumbling into the moat below. Still, they kept coming. Wehrmacht soldiers, fighting against the SS for the first time, moved beside American GIs, firing rifles and tossing grenades over the battlements. Gamelin and Renault, too old for the chaos, stayed low but refused to leave the walls. Daladier reloaded with shaking hands. Barotra's absence was felt like a missing limb. Gangle moved through the courtyard, directing fire, pulling wounded behind cover, shouting orders that nobody questioned. To the defenders, American or German, he was simply the man who knew exactly what to do. Then he heard it, a scream. Not of anger, not of triumph. A cry for help. 10:40. The shot that changed everything. Near the castle's main entrance, an Austrian hostage, a local woman Gangle had vowed to protect, was pinned down by SS gunfire. She'd been tending to a wounded GI when the attackers broke through part of the outer barricade. Bullets tore chunks of stone around her. Gangle froze for half a second. Just half. Then, he ran. Not toward cover, not toward safety, toward her. "Gangle, no!" Lee yelled from the Sherman, but the German major didn't slow down. His boots splashed through puddles of rainwater as he sprinted across open ground. He reached the woman, grabbed her by the arm, and pulled her behind a cart that served as makeshift cover. A single sniper round cracked. Gangle jerked, then collapsed. The woman screamed. Lee stopped firing for a moment, stunned. The Americans beside him went silent. Major Joseph Sepp Gangle, Wehrmacht officer, resistance ally, the man who had united enemies in a common cause, lay still on the stones of Castle Itter, killed by the regime he had once sworn to serve. His sacrifice rippled through the battlefield. The remaining German soldiers saw their officer fall and fought harder, as if every bullet was a tribute. American GIs clenched their teeth and poured fire into the attackers with renewed fury. Even the French VIPs, horrified, rose from cover and fired volleys with shaking hands. Gangle's death changed the defenders. It made them something more than a band of men holding a medieval fort. It made them brothers. 1105, defenders at the breaking point. Despite their fury, the defenders were failing. The SS had reached the lower courtyard. Only the inner gate separated them from the heart of the castle. Lee's 50 cal overheated and jammed. The Sherman was now nothing but a steel bunker. American ammo was nearly empty. The Germans had only a few rounds left. The Austrians, none. A French VIP shouted, "They're coming through the wall!" Weygand answered, "Then we stop them here." Lee slammed his fist against the turret. "Where the hell are those reinforcements?" The defenders prepared for hand-to-hand combat. Bayonets drawn, last bullets chambered. Every man knew what an SS capture meant. Execution. No mercy, no negotiation. Lee jumped down from the turret. He raised his weapon. He stood beside German soldiers whose uniforms still bore insignia from the same army he'd fought across Europe. He looked at them and said quietly, "Let's make this last." Then, a sound emerged from the valley. Not a rifle, not a grenade. A distant rising thunder. Engines. Multiple engines. American engines. 11:20. Reinforcements arrive. The road below the castle burst into movement. U.S. armored cars, half-tracks, infantry trucks, M10 tank destroyers. Lee's eyes widened. By God, they made it. At their head rode Lieutenant Harry Bass, leading a relief force from the 142nd Infantry Regiment. Alerted by Jean Borotra, who had sprinted through a war zone, reached Virgil, and convinced them to mobilize. The SS, caught between overwhelming reinforcements and a castle full of furious defenders, broke. Some fled into the forest. Some surrendered. Some fought to the last. Within minutes, the battle was over. The castle defenders, Americans, Germans, Austrians, and French VIPs, stumbled out into the courtyard, smoke rising behind them, the bodies of attackers scattered across the slope. Captain Lee climbed onto the tank turret and looked down at the fallen major, Joseph Gangle. He removed his helmet, placed it over his heart, and whispered, "Hell of a way to be a hero, Major." Epilogue: The Impossible Victory. That day, American soldiers filed a combat report that military historians still read with disbelief. They listed 14 American soldiers, 10 Wehrmacht volunteers, 6 Austrian partisans, and several French political leaders defending a medieval castle together against over 100 SS troops. Joseph Gangle was later honored by the Austrian government as a national hero, one of the few Wehrmacht officers remembered for courage in defiance of tyranny. Captain Jack Lee received the Distinguished Service Cross for valor. Jean Borotra survived the war and returned to tennis, forever remembered not for Wimbledon titles, but for the sprint that saved a fortress. The battle for Castle Itter remains the only recorded instance in World War II where American and German soldiers fought side by side against the SS, an alliance born not of politics, but of humanity. A final reminder that even in the last days of the darkest war in history, there were men who chose honor over obedience, courage over surrender, and sacrifice over survival. Thank you for watching. Like and subscribe if you'd like us to continue telling stories like this one, stories that deserve to be remembered.